Dying Light 2 Stay Human, Dead Island 2. Which game is better? That's what we're going to talk about on today's Captain's Log. This is the 042823 log. I'm Captain Beefy with the Game Vault. So let's cue up the music and we'll get right into it. Now, first off, I'm going to give you a real simple rundown of the history of these two games and how they're related to each other. Techland, which was the developer for both Dying Light games, also developed the original Dead Island game for Deep Silver. There were some creative differences moving forward, so Techland ended up branching off and creating their own game, Dying Light, whereas Deep Silver moved on and found someone else to work on Dead Island 2. Now, Dead Island, the original game, came out 2011, and if I'm not mistaken, the original Dying Light came out 4 years later in 2015. I'm pretty sure I got that right. In any case, it took a while for either of these games to get a part 2. Now, Dead Island did have the Riptide game that came out, but for the second iteration, it was in 2022, in February of 2022, that Dying Light 2 Stay Human came out, and it was just a few weeks ago here in 2023 that Dead Island 2 finally came out. Let's take a look at both of these games and talk about how they're similar and how they're different. Okay, let's talk about the settings of the games. Dying Light 2 is set in a fictional city called Villedor, which is a European city. It's divided into two major sections and is an open world game. Now, this game takes place 15 years after the zombie apocalypse, so Villedor is a little beat up and a little beat down. There are sections of it that have that feel of an older European city with the architecture and the way things are laid out. There's also an area where things look newer, big skyscrapers and everything's a little more advanced, and the billboards and all that. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition of these two architectural styles in this game, but they are divided up in two separate areas, so it feels okay in that regard. But you'll also find a lot of ruined buildings, a lot of boarded up windows, broken down cars that are just, you can tell they've been sitting there for well over a decade. They won't move. They're not doing anything. You've got some makeshift buildings like the Big Fisheye Canteen that you can tell the survivors have just cobbled together whatever they could find to build this little safe haven for themselves. You'll find little shacks on rooftops, windmills, all sorts of interesting and unique looking places, and it's quite the look to it. Dying Light 2 has a decent amount of color in the game, far more than the original game had, at least as far as I can remember. The original game was a little dingier. This one looked a little brighter, especially in the beginning. In fact, to the point that fans weren't very happy with how colorful it was. They wanted that darker, grittier look. And eventually, Techland patched the game and released this. You have this ability to change the look of the game, to give it a dirtier, grittier look. The color palette changes a little bit, and that's kind of nice. It is an open world game with small limitations, and the only small limitation is you cannot access both portions of the city until you advance the story to a certain point in the game. So you can't immediately just go to the big city, more modern area. You have to start off in the little smaller area, advance the story, and then boom, you have a way to get there. Fast travel's enabled in the game, so it's pretty easy to get around in. It's a pretty game. It looks really, really nice. You get some great vistas from on top of those skyscrapers. Villedor looks pretty awesome. Dead Island 2 is set in Los Angeles, California in modern days. They call it Hell-A instead of L.A., and it takes place immediately after the zombie apocalypse breaks out. It's rendered with a lot of great detail, very colorful, it really reflects Los Angeles and stuff I've seen about Los Angeles. I've never been there myself, but I've seen plenty of movies and television shows and documentaries and all that show you Los Angeles, and it's pretty badass looking. I mean, from the mansions to Venice Beach to Hollywood and inside studios, it's great. It looks fantastic. We get to go to Bel Air. I don't see the Fresh Prince there, but that's a different story. But it's not an open world game like Dying Light 2 was, and even the original Dead Island was open world. I mean, there were some areas that were locked off with story progression and all that. But I would call this game semi-open world because it's almost there. While the story is fairly linear and leads you to new regions and new areas and unlocks doors for you or unlocks the ability to travel between sections with loading screens, unfortunately. Although they're very short on the PlayStation 5, they're still there. But yeah, you have these different abilities, but you can backtrack. So it's not like once you leave Bel Air, you're never going back. And if you have unfinished business there, you're never going to be able to go back and address it. Like if you missed a secret chest or, a mini boss or whatever, you're going to be able to go back and visit. And it does have fast travel, much like Dying Light 2 does, but it doesn't unlock till later in the game. So you've got to be a little bit patient for that. The city itself, like I said, it's the game takes place right after the apocalypse begins. In fact, the opening scene, you're on an airplane, and I won't spoil anything, but you can see it unfold, and it's utterly insane and fun. So, unlike Dying Light 2, when you're in Hell A in Dead Island, everything's fresh. There's fresh blood stains, The cars are not rusted out and on flat tires. They're just there. They're parked, they're crashed, they're whatever, and you get to see a cool variety of cars. Remember, this is LA, so there are some expensive rides there. The houses are not all disgusting yet. They're not all boarded up and all there. I mean, there's a few that have some boards up and whatnot. But most of the way things are blocked off is by like furniture leaned against windows and doors and stuff like that. Typically what you would have done immediately if you didn't have the time yet to board things up, because if the apocalypse just happened, well, you don't have the time to address it, right? So both of these games, are relegated to one city. Dying Light 2 feels bigger in scope and all that because of the verticality and just the size of the map, whereas Dead Island 2 feels like a much smaller and more compact map, but there's a lot packed into that area. As far as the setting goes, I mean, these games both have their pros and cons, but I'd have to give the edge to Dying Light 2 just because of the sheer size of it and the diversity of places you can go. And I mean, you've got places where you can swim underwater, you've got power plants, you've got water treatment plants, you've got enemy camps. There's a lot to do, a lot of collectibles, a lot of side missions and all that. Dead Island has some of that, but not nearly as much, so the scale is much smaller. But again, it's a smaller game, it's smaller in scope, it's much more refined, so that's not a negative for Dead Island 2 in the way that it is presented in that game. It works, and it works perfectly, I'd have to say. But I'll give the edge to Dying Light 2 for this one. Let's talk about the stories of these two games. Dying Light 2, you play a character named Aiden, who is a pilgrim who shows up to Villedor, and his entire time there is spent seeking out his little sister, and he's got these weird disjointed memories of her and things that happened when they were younger. Involves the bad guy, the big bad in the game, and it's kind of weird, kind of surrealistic sometimes. But that is his whole story, trying to find her, and he travels through this city and he meets up with different factions of people. He has to choose alliances, and he makes choices that directly impact the game and the way the city looks. You have two basic factions of characters, NPCs that you can side with. You've got the militaristic guys, and then you've got the hippies. You've got the, what are they called, the survivors, and then the I don't even remember the other one right now. but they're like, they seem to be like retired. They're like cops and military, so they run things a little more strict. It's almost like you got to choose between the commies or the fascists at this point. It's kind of funny in that regard. But the story's there. It's not especially interesting. It's not especially compelling. There's no great, there is a good twist in it toward the end, but for the most part it's standard fare. Now, there are a lot of side missions, and some of these side missions have some great moments in them and great stories. You might be helping out somebody find somebody else that's missing, or just a lot of weird little stories. There's one involving a kid and a dog that's kind of heartbreaking early on in the game. So these moments really shine through and work out well. And the characters, for the most part, are voiced well. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. There's a few misfires here and there, but most of them sell their role, so that's a good thing. Looking at Dead Island 2, Dead Island 2's story is simple. You are trying to escape from Hell A. You've met up with a small group of survivors, and you're helping them get the hell out of Hell A as well. And that's it. There's no craziness, no underlying, you're not trying to find somebody and rescue them and all that. You want out. You want to go somewhere safe. Now, there is a little twist to it, and this twist also happens in Dying Light 2, is that you've been bitten. So you do have the infection, but for some reason, now in Dying Light 2, they explain it, a way to suppress the infection, but in Dead Island, for some reason, you're immune to it. So that does put a wrinkle in the story where, when they find out you're immune to it, people want to talk to you, and they want to, they probably want to experiment on you, to be honest, but in any case, so you have that going for you. The characters in Dead Island 2 are not the nicest people in the world. Like, in Dying Light 2, you played the Pilgrim Aiden. That's the only character you could play. You got 6 choices for character selection in Dead Island 2, which is kind of neat because it gives a little replayability, but we'll talk about that later. But all the characters are they're not heroes. They're just regular people. They've all got some serious flaws to them from what I've seen. And despite that, they're still likable and they're fun, The characters you meet during the game, the NPCs and all that, are just absolutely hilarious for the most part. And the game, the story, the side missions, it really satirizes that whole scene in Hollywood, the narcissism of the actors and actresses. It touches on all kinds of things. There's an early side mission that involves a social media influencer, and she's so cringy, but it works because that character's kind of cringy in real life, a lot of times. The person that's in a different area every week taking pictures of themselves and like, oh, look, I'm in Monaco. Oh, look, I'm in Alaska. Oh, look, I'm here. So it's quite humor how it mocks these things. You also get another guy that's like the retired old actor who was the action hero, and now he can't walk so good because he did his own stunts, So there's a lot of cool stuff in the story, but like I said, it's very, very simple, very straightforward. Again, I'd have to give the edge to Dying Light 2 on this one because it's got a far richer story and the side missions are deeper and broader, and a lot of times some of them are pretty short, but most of them involve an investment of a little bit of time and a little bit of travel. So I'll give the edge to Dying Light 2 on that one as well. All right, let's talk. I was going to do these two separate, but I think I'm going to kind of blend them together because they work well together. But combat and traversal. So in Dying Light 2, the combat is melee combat, and it's strictly melee combat, save for a few bows that you find a little bit later in the game, and possibly one crossbow if you make the right choice down the line for obtaining that. But otherwise, it's melee, 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 and you've got a wide variety of weapons that you can use. You've got a wide variety of moves, kicks, slides, a lot of ways to deal damage to your enemies, and that's great because the enemies in Dying Light 2 come at you pretty hard. Even baseline zombies will easily swarm you from time to time. And it just seems like there's a never-ending supply of the undead in Villador. It's kind of crazy. But the lack of guns, there were guns in the first one. They weren't very easily found. You didn't get them till a little bit later in the game. But when you got them, they were, it was kind of nice to have guns once in a while, because every now and then you come across that one big jerk that you don't even want to get close to. And you're like, you know what? I'm just going to shoot this guy Indiana Jones style, and move on. So the lack of guns kind of hurts the combat, but otherwise it's pretty solid. It doesn't have finesse to it like some other games do, and we'll talk about Dead Island and how that one has a little more finesse. But you can dismember your enemies and all that. You can chop their heads off and their legs off and their arms off. And Techland just did a huge update on the game right before Dead Island came out that kind of impacted that more and made the combat a lot better. And I think they did that because they saw what Dead Island was doing, and they wanted to kind of elevate their game to make it as close to as interesting as the Dead Island combat was. Which isn't a bad thing. And this is exactly what I was hoping for. I was hoping these two games would get out there, and I see them talk back and forth on social media, on Twitter, the accounts, and it cracks me up because doesn't look like there's a drop of bad blood between the two. In fact, there's some fun ribbing going back and forth and congratulations and all that. And I think that's great because, they say iron sharpens iron. So if one game sees something in the other game that's great and that works, and they want to make their own version of it in their game, and it improves it, and vice versa, back and forth, and more power to both of you, man. Make both games and let them elevate each other. That would be great. It's kind of neat to have these two games. They were released 14 months apart. So Dead Island 2 does have Dying Light 2 has a serious head start in obtaining a player base, and there's a lot of replayability to it. But again, we'll talk about that later. But it's kind of nice to see them get out there and duke it out a little bit and fight for your time. Like if I'm wanting to kill zombies, I've got to choose one of these games. And we'll talk about that. Now, traversal for Dying Light 2 is fun. The original Dying Light introduced this parkour system that was utterly insane, with wall walks and lots of climbing and jumping, and Dying Light 2 just takes that and expands on it, and a lot of it can be used in combat too. Now, Dying Light 2 also has a grappling hook. Dying Light 2 has a glider. There's a lot of cool stuff going on in there. So you can get yourself up to the top of a building and then go glide across the city to another one. Now, it is tied to your stamina, so it's not like it's an endless glider that makes, traversing from one part of the map to the next a cinch. No, you've got to stop, get your stamina back up, or find these vents that are spewing up hot steam and ride one of those, which will restore your stamina and lift you up, because you're constantly going down little by little. So traversal in Dying Light 2 is just utterly fantastic. I mean, jumping and climbing buildings, swinging on ropes, barely catching the next jump with your fingertips, and hauling yourself up. It's all a blast. It's fun. It's fluid, and it's incredible. Dead Island 2 does not have a traversal system as exciting as that. Occasionally you can vault over things, climb a couple fences here and there if they're the right height, but it's very limited to just walking, running. In combat, you can either block or dodge. You got a little dodge mechanic, but you can't do things in Dead Island 2 that you can do in Dying Light in combat. And so it suffers a little bit in that regard. But the physical combat in Dead Island 2 is utterly insane. Utterly insane. Both games feature elemental abilities that you can put onto your weapons, like fire and electricity, stuff like that. So that's kind of cool because it adds extra damage and creates status effects on the undead. But in Dead Island 2, it's just the combat is intense, It's fun, and it just feels crazy. You have a lot less zombies than you do in Dying Light 2. So you're able to move around the battlefield a little bit more. You might have 3 of these guys on you. You can run up there and, get a quick hit in, dodge to the side, smash them in the legs. Now they can't walk. Knock an arm off so they can't pound the ground and do damage to you. There's all kinds of neat stuff you can do. Both games also feature throwable items. In Dying Light 2, they're consumables, so you have to make them, and you also have to level them as you go, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in Dead Island, once you get a throwable item, whether it's a throwing star, meat bait, a pipe bomb, whatever, it goes on a cooldown when you use it. And the cooldown takes long enough that you can't spam them, but not so long that they're worthless. So I thought that was kind of an interesting mechanic, because I'm like, well, wow, you just, it's like you throw a pipe bomb and then another one slowly appears back in your belt. But it's a video game, it's not real life, so who cares, right? It's a mechanic. That's how it works. And that saves you a lot of grinding for parts and having to go and say, okay, let me go make 15 of those again so I have them. I get it. It works. And it works well. It works very well. Both games allow you to block, stuff like that. You can always run away from combat if you have to. It's a little tougher in some games than the others, but I think Dying Light 2, you have a better chance because you can run, you can jump off of a building and open up your glider and just disappear if you're up high, or if you're on the ground level, you can run over one of those vents and then deploy your and fly off. You just deploy it standing over there, hit square, and poof, you get lifted into the sky, and you and your glider are taking off, and you're out of a bad situation. Dead Island 2 has guns in it. You don't get them right away in the game. It takes a little bit. It takes a couple hours into the game, but you get your first gun. And it looks like ammo is going to be, somewhat limited, of course. It is California, and it's, it's right after the apocalypse. Not everybody had guns, so it's kind of funny that you even found one. But you do have the ability to access guns. And there's a variety of guns, from pistols to shotguns, rifles. The first gun you get is like a sniper-style rifle that you get to use. And that's cool. That elevates the combat quite a bit, because now you have an opportunity to do some ranged attacks and maybe dispatch a particularly distasteful enemy before you enter an area. So I like that a lot. I've got to give... So this one's tough, and I should have separated them. I would give traversal to Dying Light, hands down. Combat, however, to Dead Island, because the Dead Island combat is just so much fun. Kicking a guy in the face 3 times till he drops to the ground, and then smacking him with a bat or a hunk of crowbar or whatever. I mean, it's a blast. Smashing heads. You can smash heads in both of them, but it seems like it's a lot easier in Dead Island 2 to down somebody and then smash their head. And the targeted body parts, the flesh system, which is fully locational, whatever. It's a system where they actually build your enemies from the bone out to the outfit and skin. And depending on what type of attacks you use on them, you can wear these things down. And I've sat there with a corpse and just smacked it back and forth and watched the flesh peel away until you had muscle, and then the muscle until you had bone. It's absolutely vile, disgusting, and it's great. I love it. You have acid attacks that will literally make the zombie melt in front of you. You just see them, the skin, the muscle, and everything just melting off of them until they collapse into a heap of gore-covered bone. It's so freaking gross. It's so gross. So I think it's much better in that. So I'd give the edge in combat to Dead Island 2 without a doubt. Now, looking at mechanics, both games feature a leveling system, zombie, for the character, and which is pretty standard and stuff like that. Nobody wants to go into a zombie game with X amount of hit points and end the game with the same amount. So as you progress through the game, you level up. Dying Light 2 gives you 2 separate skill trees to work with as you level up. One based off of your combat and one based off of your parkour. And the way you level is by using these skills. So you don't just level up and say, oh, I have a point, can I put it in parkour or can I put it in combat? No, if you're fighting, you're gaining combat points. So if you do a lot of fighting but you don't do a lot of parkour, you may level up the combat tree a lot faster than you do the parkour tree, and vice versa. You also have the ability to collect these items that will increase your immunity time and your stamina and stuff like that. You know, that's a separate mechanic there. So it's a little complex, not for RPG standards, but in this comparison video, it's a little more complex than the Dead Island system. You have the ability to craft items, whether they're consumables, you know, Molotov cocktails to medical kits. Each one of these items you have to get a blueprint for, and you can level up the blueprints to make them better versions of themselves. So when you first obtain the ability to make a med kit, your med kit is going to be pretty weak and pretty crappy, and it is what it is. So as you level it up, and it requires money and resources to level it up, it gets better, it heals more, it heals quicker, so forth and so on. Molotov cocktails deal more damage, you know, it's the standard thing. Weapons you can modify, and you have the ability to put up to 4 modifications on it: a tip, a shaft, a handle, I think the other one is, and then a charm. The charms are basically decorative except for one special one that you can find that will add durability and repair a weapon, because weapons do degrade in the game and will eventually break, so you want to be able to repair that weapon if possible, and this one charm you can obtain to do that. But yeah, you've got a lot of variety on the weapons. You've got one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons, bows, you've got sharp weapons, blunt weapons, anything from an axe made out of a no parking sign, you know, to a sword that you find, a claymore. I mean, there's all kinds of craziness you can find in there. Hammers, axes, it's wild. And of course it has that standard item level system that you see so often in modern gaming, where you have, you know, your basic gray item, and then you go up in colors there with the, you know, up to purples, oranges, and then, well, usually it's gold. And then now they have legendary items that are like this bright bronze orange color. And those are your best weapons that you find in the game. You can find them looting them from boxes and in various different ways. So it's a pretty complex system for leveling up your weapons and so forth. Even the mods that you put on those, when you first obtain the ability to put them on there, they're very low level. So it may only add 1% damage with fire, but you can level those mods up as well. And again, it requires resources, and some of the resources are hard to get and require you to kill a lot of bad guys and some tougher bad guys to get those resources, but you have the ability to do that. So maxing out your mods and all that is important, and, you know, will help you make it the best weapons of the game. Dead Island has a similar system where you can mod weapons and all that, and it does have the various colors from the gray to the green to the blue to the purple, and I believe there's an orange or a gold, whatever at the end. I haven't got one yet. But yeah, you can modify things to it and all that. But one thing that Dead Island does that's kind of cool is you can level your weapon to match your level. It costs money, and the higher you get, the more money it costs, so I don't recommend doing it all the time. But it's kind of cool, like if you find a weapon that you really, really, really dig and you don't want to get rid of, but now all of a sudden it's worthless because you found it at level 5 and now you're level 7 and you're barely doing any damage with it, well, you can just go to a workbench and level it up. And it'll bring it up to your current level, making it deal more damage and making it, you know, worthwhile again. Like I said, I don't recommend doing that because it is expensive, but if you have a weapon you're really fond of, then, you know, man, it's your game and you go for it, dude. Level that puppy up. Weapons also degrade in this game, so you're going to want to make sure you have a backup weapon on you at all times, especially in early game when all of the weapons have horrible durability on them. I remember that opening scene, picking up like a hunk of wood and smacking a guy a few times, and then it breaks, and I found a chunk of rebar with a little concrete on it, and just wait until I got to the first safe house so I could maybe find a decent weapon to use. It was utterly awful. But as you progress, the weapons get higher levels. So if you're at level 5, they're dropping at level 5. If you're at level 12, they're dropping at level 12. So you're going to constantly get new weapons. So I wouldn't get too hooked on a basic weapon early on, until you get to maybe the pink ones. I think they're pink and not purple, but yeah, they're kind of pinky purple. But in any case, once you get to that level, then yeah, you might find some keepers that you want to keep leveling with you. But before then, unless you find a great blue one and you don't have anything better yet, go ahead, level it up and keep it with you. It's kind of cool. Now, for skills and all that, Dead Island handles things, Dead Island 2 handles things in a unique way. Instead of a skill tree, you have cards that you equip. And as you advance through the game, you'll find some of these cards in the wild. You'll get some of them as rewards for quests. And as you advance and level, you'll have the ability to equip more and more of these cards. Now, I know what you're thinking, cards. Why would they ruin this game with a card mechanic? Well, it's not like it's a random thing like in Marvel's Midnight Suns, where you create a deck and then your cards are brought up randomly and you have to use what you use. These cards are skills, so you choose them and you place them in their proper slots. There's 4 different types that you can add to your character, and each one has unique cards for it, and they do synergize with each other. So when you're selecting your cards and as you level up and all that, and you get new cards, look at how they synergize with each other, because you can really work and make a pretty powerful build depending on your cards. It can really have a severe impact on your character. So it's a unique system. I haven't mastered it yet. I'm still kind of playing with it and trying to figure out what the best combos are. I know there's a million videos out there telling you use this combo for OP builds and use that combo. I'm trying to avoid that stuff and play it on my own to figure it out. And that's part of the fun of the game, is to say, okay, what can I do? How can I put these cards in here to maximize my efficiency and match my play style? So it's a pretty cool system and it's a lot different than the standard but effective system that Dying Light 2 uses. Mechanic wise, that's a hard one. It's a really hard one. I think I like the Dead Island one just a little bit more, and I'll tell you why. The cards are unique and all that. There's not so much worrying about leveling this and that and having to go out like, in Dying Light 2, I fought a lot and I did a lot more fighting and I did parkour, so my combat level would be up way higher than my other level, my parkour level. So I'd have to go out there and just run and jump and swing and all that to build it up and basically grind out some parkour points. Do those parkour challenges, that sort of thing. And the simplicity of just leveling up and eventually getting new cards and looking at those cards and trying to figure out how to work them made that part a lot easier and a lot less grindy. I also like the ability to upgrade your weapon to match your level, which is kind of cool, because in Dying Light, if you find a level 3 weapon, it's always going to be a level 3 weapon. I don't care what you do to it. You can put the best mods on it and all that. It'll help it, but it's always going to be a level 3 weapon. So if you find something you really like early on, you're going to have to abandon it eventually, because eventually it's going to be worthless. So that's that. That's that. But I would give the edge to Dead Island 2. So let that sit where it sits. But overall, I think both games are fantastic. They both bring something different but the same to the table. Looking at combat with a group of zombies in Dying Light 2 it's very chaotic. You're just swinging, everybody's electrified, everything is on fire around you, and you're getting hit and smacked and all that. In Dead Island 2, you can get the same effect going on, but you just seem to have a little bit more freedom in moving around and controlling things a little bit more. The crowds aren't usually as bad, except for like scripted events where you have to defend something for X amount of time or kill X amount of zombies, whatever. The variety of zombies is pretty solid in both games, although I think Dead Island does it a little bit better with introducing quote-unquote apex zombies like the Screamer or the Crusher in a major fight, like a boss fight, and then all of a sudden, once that's done, they're going to appear on the streets and you can engage them. They got cool guys with bees coming out of them. They've got guys in hazmat suits. They've got grenadiers, army guys with grenades on them, so if you target the grenade, you can make them explode. There's a lot more environmental hazards that make combat a lot better and more exciting than in Dying Light 2. So if I had to choose a favorite of the two games, I would go with Dead Island 2. Interested in hearing what you think down below. I know I did a poll on it, and last I looked, it was at exactly 50-50. So, that's kind of what I expected because both games are so great. I never remember coming home, from work going, oh, I can't wait to get into Dying Light 2 tonight. It's so much fun. I remember coming home saying, okay, yeah, let's see what's going on next in the story. Let's get this done. Let's go find out this. Let's try to do that. With Dead Island, it's like, man, I just want to come home, unwind, and kill a bunch of zombies and have a good old time. Advance the story, of course, but that's almost secondary at this point. I'm just going out and enjoying myself and killing and having an absolute blast. So my preferred game out of the two would definitely be Dead Island 2 by a small margin, and that's mainly because of the joy of the combat, the fact that there's guns in there, the environmental kills that you can pull off. They're all a lot of fun. Well, anyway, this has been a long one. I'm sorry to keep you so long. Thanks for joining me. As always, I'm Captain Beefy with the Game Vault. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of both games. Was I wrong? Was I right? It's my opinion. Let's hear yours. I'll see you guys next time. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell for notifications. Until next time, peace.